the Spot Track Podcast, talking sports contracts, the salary cap, and business of sports.
Today's edition of the Spot Track Podcast is presented by Bettor Edge. If you dabble in sports betting like everybody here at Spot Track does, you're probably looking for something with a little bit more control, a brand you can trust. It's going to give you the odds and the edge that you've been looking for. Bettor Edge solves this problem. It's a social betting marketplace all across America and now in the Apple iStore as well. Safe, reliable payouts, lightning fast payouts, and you can start today with $20 on the house. Visit bettoredge.com or download that app and use code SPOTTRAC, SPOTRAC, at sign up for $20 on the house to start. It's a pretty good time. NFL futures are in. MLB regular season is well underway, and the NBA and NHL playoffs are hot. It's a nice time to make a little extra coin, and you want to be controlling the vig and the juice as much as possible. That's what Bettor Edge is all about. My name is Mike Ginnitti. It is Monday, April 28th. The NFL draft is behind us. Not without drama, that's for sure. We'll talk about it in a moment here. Just a couple of house cleaning things. Keith Smith is feverishly working to get through most of these NBA offseason previews as teams are eliminated, right? So he's going backwards. Teams that were out months ago have been written and posted. You kind of know those usual suspects. And the ones that are about to bow out of this first round here will be up on deck here. And Keith's got really outstanding deep dives. You've probably seen some stanzas and snippets of this kind of work being done in other channels and other areas. I promise you, Keith's are the most in-depth, the least biased, and the most tied to the financials, which is obviously what we're all about here. So please give that a read, share those, ask Keith questions. He geeks out on this stuff more than any human being that I've ever come across, and he knows the answers. So please give those a read. We'll have Keith on soon to wrap up some of this first round playoff stuff and talk more about some of the offseason storylines that are not just percolating, but maybe roasting hot as we anticipate quite the June and July for the NBA in terms of turnover and trades and possibly some buyouts to go with that as well. So that's one. Two is I'll continue to push some of this NFL content because now that the draft is passed, we are ramping up to 90-man rosters. That's big UDFA season, which quickly, just aside, there's reports by the dozens that your team has signed X, that there's a bonus allocated. A lot of this stuff will come true, but it takes quite a long time for teams to officially announce these signings, the league to officially process these signings, and then the official bonus and salary guarantee stuff to really come to fruition. We're going to wait this out. So I know that a big part of this is how many roster spots do we have left? What's our cap situation after the draft? We're going to get there as quickly as humanly possible, but it doesn't make sense to guess and kind of use X posts and threads and things like that to sort of try to piece this together when a lot of what we're seeing out there ends up being a tryout or an invitation that never actually comes to a contract. And sometimes things are spoken out loud by agents that, hey, this guy's going to get $300,000 guaranteed, and it ends up being 180. And while that sounds insignificant, we are looking for 100% accuracy because some of these teams, the Giants being one of them, are down near the threshold, about 1.3 million of top 51 cap space right now. So the UDFAs and the bonuses associated with them can actually take them pretty close to the red. So we're going to wait this out, make sure we see the confirmed information and how this all lays out. There's about a $240,000 bonus pool for each team with these UDFAs in 2025 per the CBA. That is separate from what they can guarantee on a base salary, which is unlimited. So the majority of these, 99.9, these will be minimum 3-year contracts, $840,000, $1 mil, $1.1 mil over the next 3 seasons. None of that future stuff is guaranteed, but we're seeing already $250,000 of that first year base salary guaranteed, fully guaranteed, along with, a 10 to 25 to sometimes $50,000 signing bonus as well, based on some of these big ringers that are having to be overpaid to get in the door. You'll hear a contract. It will be signed. These players will be cut in 6 weeks after the June minicamp. And we'll hear about it all over again, them lashing on to new teams and practice squads. There's a lot that goes with these UDFAs. However, as I noted on X last week, more and more of these guys are not only making rosters, but sticking on rosters and competing for not so much starting roles, but significant playing time. Obviously, teams that are paying 50, 55, 60 million at the top of their payrolls for quarterbacks and to some degree now edge rushers and maybe wide receivers and cornerbacks are looking for the most value possible. Well, this is the most value. You have the most control. It's the least amount guaranteed. And for all intents, you're getting a 3-year term with these UDFAs. So the team has ample opportunity to maneuver here if these guys can actually stick and play and contribute. So it's a big part of the process. In the grand scheme of the financials, is it a big part of the salary cap? No, but we're trying to get it at 100% right, not just 95% right. And that will take some time. So just a little bit of a warning there. If you're seeing, beat reporters and whatnot, projecting the fact that the roster is at 90 and we're still in the 80s somewhere, it's probably because we're ironing out some of these UDFA bonus structures. With that said, last thing on the UDFAs, 99.9% of these UDFA contracts are subject to offsets. So if a player makes $60,000 on a full guaranteed salary, okay, is cut, then signs elsewhere, whatever he earns elsewhere is reduced from that original $60,000. That's obviously a big conversation with these draft picks as well. And you'll see a lot of the first and second round picks fighting for this offset language so that they can attempt to at least double dip if things go sour down the road and something has to get removed. That's a big part of the UDFA process, the practice squads, things like that. Generally speaking, these players are not allowed to double dip because they are, the lower ring right now of these financials. So it's a big part to say he's not just making this might be all he makes. Okay. If there's a $300,000 guarantee, and that's, I think, the high we have right now on an offensive lineman, but that player ends up being released, it won't be 300,000 plus whatever he makes elsewhere. It'll be that 300,000 will then transfer over to some new process that he can essentially chip away at if he's on practice squads or active rosters throughout the 2025 season. So that's a lot to say out loud. We'll try to make note of this as specific examples come into play. But long story short, with these UDFA contracts, not exactly what you see usually. Wait to the deep details, and let's just see how long the majority of these players can stick around. And we will wrap this up week 1, week 2 of the NFL season to start to assess if this trend is actually increasing. Like it certainly appears, and would make a heck of a lot of sense that it would, which is this might be a really nice way to build out 10 to 15% of your roster over the course of the next couple of seasons to offset where the financials are going to the top of the league. The 7 rounds produced 257 draft picks real quickly in terms of how those all laid out this year. 2 position groups secured 31 picks each. That would be the wide receiver and the defensive tackle. The wide receiver is only shocking because it wasn't a big wide receiver draft, but the depth at the position has always been there, and the need at the position has always been there. And the college game's a passing league, and the NFL's a passing league. So it makes sense that there's a need and a supply of that position, despite the fact that we didn't have 2 or 3 top players, at least in terms of, the ability for teams to go up and seek these players out via first round or second round trades. 31 though, 31 wide receivers, 31 defensive tackles. Third was 27 cornerbacks, 26 defensive ends right after that, or edge defenders essentially. And then here we go. 5th place, 25 running backs as promised. This was the position that everybody was referring to for months and months leading up to this draft. And I think it bore out basically exactly as we assumed it was going to, which is Ginnitti was going to go about as high as a running back has gone, especially in this age. The teams that were in on him, the Jaguars, the Raiders, the Bears, were all in. Jacksonville obviously decided to go for a much, much sexier situation with the Travis Hunter trade up. And that that left Ginnitti to fall to 6 for the Raiders, which, if you follow anybody of import around this league, that was the team that was basically saying out loud, he's not getting past us. If somebody's going to move up and steal him away from us, so be it, but he's not getting past us, and he didn't. But in terms of that first round, we saw Ginnitti go at 6, Amari and Hampton go at 22 to the Chargers, and then quickly on day 2, Quinshon Judkins to Cleveland and Travion Henderson to New England early in that second round, with RJ Harvey joining the Broncos at pick 60 just a few moments later. So those are the top ones. And then, the third round saw Caleb Johnson to Pittsburgh. These were all the teams, the usual suspect teams. Cam Scatterbo, a nice pick for the Giants at 105. And Travis Etienne's little brother, Trevor, to the Panthers at 114. We had, I believe it was 9. I'm doing the quick math here. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. How about 11 running backs drafted within the first 117 picks? It's good stuff. It bore out like we told us it was going to, and for the most part, by the way, most of this draft did. So kudos to the beat guys and the insiders and the people that put in way too much work over the course of the last year trying to project this thing, because it is an imperfect science. One yin changes another yang. We saw that quite a bit with the tight end market. Colston Loveland kind of going ahead of Tyler Warren, and then the chips fell quickly in the second round after that. I think 3 in the 5 picks. There's something to that effect. So that was it. Those are the positions that dominated this draft. We had 20 linebackers and 20 safeties, and then the guards and tackles each split at 19 each, depending on how the team announced that offensive lineman accordingly. So, we'll talk about the quarterbacks here in a second. That's actually obviously the breadwinner of all this, but a fairly diverse draft. We didn't have one position completely run away with this thing, and there's a lot of meat potatoes inside the middle of this thing. But I do want to make note of this: 2 kickers, a punter, and a long snapper drafted in 2025. That's a beautiful thing. That's about as good as you can get. We actually had every single position group accounted for. Every single one. We had returners. We had 3 centers. We had 2 kickers. We had a punter. We had a long snapper. Plenty of edge defenders. Every single group was accounted for within the 257 picks. And obviously, they're all being accounted for in the UDFAs as well. But that's about as good as it gets. And it's proof that, especially in that 6th and 7th round, when the trading really quiets down and teams kind of know what they're doing, because they're not really competing with anybody at that point in time. They're going to make something. Anybody who's filled out a fantasy roster knows exactly what I'm talking about. You've got 2 or 3 names in mind. If any of them get taken off the board, it's fine, because plan B and plan C were going to be just as good anyway. And in a lot of effects, it's let's just keep player X, maybe a punter, maybe a kicker, off the UDFA market so that we don't get outbid and have to overutilize some kind of bonus pool that keeps us away from getting 2 or 3 other UDFAs that we're looking to bring in, but don't have the bonus allocations to do so. So there's a bit of cat and mouse, chess and checkers happening there with, let's get this guy on a 4-year contract, an $80,000 signing bonus, no big deal. But let's also keep him off of this UDFA market, which, if you follow it at all, is chaotic, at least for the first 24 to 48 hours. You had the beat reporters announcing those UDFA decisions well before the draft was over, because agents are dying to get it out there for 2 reasons. Number one, if they're happy with the salary allocations and the guarantees, they want to promote it, obviously. But as stated in the open here, nothing's set in stone until it's set in stone. Okay. And nobody's processing a UDFA contract to the league at 7 p.m. on a Saturday night, which is when this draft finished, right? That's just not happening. There's going to be a carryover into today, Monday, when league filings will become official for the most part, many of them. And then they're set in stone. But you want to get the announcement, air quote, announcement of your UDFA out as quickly as possible to ramp up the fact that there is immediate interest in this player, so that 13 other teams who also have interest in that player now come in and maybe offer a usurped or a higher salary guarantee to draw that player elsewhere. So it's fluid. It's fluid, not just with the reporting and guys like us trying to track this stuff, but it's fluid with the process of actually completing and finalizing these contracts, because it is a negotiation until it's not. And we do see a lot of changes. We'll see some players that were announced over the past 2 days change teams today and change to different organizations because of fit, because of other UDFAs that were signed, or because of increased salary guarantees. So we're going to let all the dust settle a little bit, and we'll get them in as quickly as possible and update the world with the closest top 51 cap space that we can offer you. In terms of colleges, no surprise. Georgia and Ohio State dominated with 14 picks each. Texas at 12, Oregon at 10. A down year for them, so that was a nice bump. And then we had Mississippi, I believe, had 12. Ole Miss. Lane Kiffin he's the John Calipari of college football. Wherever he goes, he produces professional football players. He doesn't win a lot of ball games, necessarily speaking. He's not in playoff contention, necessarily speaking, but he is the kind of coach that gets players to a point that makes their intangibles and their tangibles extremely tempting for NFL teams, and he gets them drafted. So that's sort of his bugaboo. Alabama down to 7. It's one of their lowest years in a long time, and you can kind of understand why. Florida at 7, LSU at 7, the U at 7, and Michigan at 7 as well. And that's kind of your top tier of these colleges in terms of how the draft bore out over the weekend. 35 trades were processed between Wednesday night and Saturday afternoon. So just leading up to the draft, and then inside the draft and throughout Travis Hunter, all the way to the final trade, which is worth discussing, which is Minnesota acquiring quarterback Sam Howell and a 5th round pick for a earlier 5th round pick that Seattle jumped up and grabbed a defensive tackle with. This was a nice one. It's the only player trade we saw throughout the draft, and that surprised me a little bit. I did think we'd see something like George Pickens or one of these names out there that we've been hearing quite a bit, kind of go along with a pick for something both this and next year, and sort of set somebody up for a good situation to lead into 2026 with. But it didn't happen. Doesn't mean it's not going to happen. We'll talk about some trade candidates probably Thursday with Brandon, as again I sort of take away as much content as I can from these updated rosters and these new team outlooks. But Sam Howell leaves Seattle after backing up last year. He brings a non-guaranteed $1.1 million salary to Minnesota, and it's just some security for JJ McCarthy, because that's sort of how things are looking right now. I believe him now when they say they're out on Aaron Rodgers. Do I think that they're completely done at the quarterback position? I don't. I think it would be somewhat reckless to run with just these two. However, there's plenty of time. They do have UDFA signings. I believe they signed the Minnesota quarterback out of college on a UDFA deal. That's been officially reported by the team. And by the way, there's plenty of jockeying still to happen here, as one of the things we will see today, tomorrow, and for days to come are cuts from NFL rosters to coincide with draft picks that just happened, or UDFAs that just happened, because you're now capped out at 90 on the roster. There are certainly teams that will have surplus, as we'll get to in a second here with Cleveland, and you'll see some of these players thrown back into the pool and sign on, latch on elsewhere. But the Sam Howell trade, certainly one of import, even though Howell himself, not a legitimate starting quarterback in this league, but he joins Brett Rippon, longtime backup, and Max Brosmer, that's the Minnesota quarterback on a UDFA deal, as the only quarterbacks behind JJ McCarthy right now in this depth chart in Minnesota. It's something to monitor. We'll see where we go from here. But in terms of Minnesota and Pittsburgh and Cleveland and the Giants to some degree, the Aaron Rodgers, the Kirk Cousins conversations, I think they're going to quiet down a little bit here, right? By the way, Seattle, in trading Sam Howell, drafted Jalen Milroe out of Alabama. So you can see that there's a different plan in terms of where they're headed over the short term and maybe even the long term, because, as we've noted many times here, that Sam Darnold contract, while it's 3 for $100 and change, is really just 1 for 37.5 on its outset. And if they want to move on from him right after that Super Bowl, after 1 year, they can do so without any further damage. So it's a 1 for 37.5 until it's not. And we'll see where that takes us from there. So there's a world where they've drafted Sam Darnold's eventual incumbent, but I think Miller was a bit more of a project than many of these other quarterbacks we've been talking about here. And he lands in a spot, though, where there's at least going to be a chance to compete in the future. Probably not for 2025, certainly not for 2025 with Sam on that price point, but a decent spot for him for sure. Pittsburgh kind of waited on us. They certainly said no more times than they said yes during the draft. All right. But they have certainly changed the outlook. For a while there, I was convinced it was going to be Mason Rudolph's team. But they ended up in the 6th round with the 185th pick, taking Will Howard out of Ohio State. Certainly a capable quarterback, certainly a championship caliber quarterback, at least at the college level. But he's a 6th round quarterback. And as you heard many people say, and I think Mel Kiper is still screaming it to the clouds, we just don't see starting quarterbacks come past the 4th round. We just don't. We have the numbers. We have the data. He's not just speaking this into existence. It exists. All right. The Russell Wilsons and the Dak Prescotts and obviously the Tom Brady's of the world and the Brock Purdy's of the world, they don't just happen. Is there a Brock Purdy situation, in the future? Of course. But it's 1 out of 125 draft picks at the quarterback position. That's what it is. Okay. I mean, it took 20 years from us to get to Tom Brady to Brock Purdy, and Brock Purdy's not Tom Brady. So it's an inexact science, but there's plenty of data to state that a quarterback taken in the 6th round isn't just incredible value. He's probably not a starting quarterback. So with that said, Mason Rudolph, Skylar Thompson, Will Howard are your Steelers quarterbacks right now. And maybe a UDFA to come. I would say certainly a UDFA to come, at least. There's still a wide open door here for Aaron Rodgers. If Aaron Rodgers wants to play football and wants to latch himself into the AFC North. If not, I would make this a Kirk Cousins destination by all accords. Now, Atlanta's going to be rigid. They are going to be stubborn, and they are not going to release Kirk Cousins. Not even after June 1st. Will they trade Kirk Cousins after June 1st? 100%. Because that will help things out a little bit here. However, I do think this is the landing spot. We'll talk about Cleveland in a second here. But this is a world now where the Pittsburgh Steelers added somebody, but that somebody isn't enough in terms of momentum to get us to a point where we know who the QB1 is week 1 on September 9th for the Pittsburgh Steelers. One of these two quarterbacks in terms of Aaron Rodgers and Kirk Cousins should be 100% invested in what the Pittsburgh Steelers look like over the next couple of months, because it seems like this is the single destination. Because, and obviously this is the big takeaway from this draft, the Cleveland Browns went overboard over the past couple of months in a very positive way. I wouldn't say in a reckless way by any degree. Okay. We still don't have the full breakdown on the Joe Flacco contract, but it's been reported as a 1 for 4 with $3 million fully guaranteed, which makes sense. There's probably some per game active bonuses, and I'm sure there's incentives that can take this thing into the teens in terms of wins and playoff wins and all that stuff. Is Joe Flacco expendable now? I don't think so. I still think if he wants to play football, is for now the starting quarterback on this roster. That's how I'd read it. Is Kenny Pickett, who was acquired from Philadelphia, expendable? Yes, but just understand that the $2.6 million they acquired for 2025 from Philly is fully guaranteed. And I don't believe Kenny Pickett is tradable again, even though he's been traded twice. So assuming they're going to have to release him, they're going to have to eat that money. They're going to have to pay it out. They're going to have to take that cap hit and kind of hope that he gets picked up elsewhere on a minimum to offset that a little bit. But Kenny Pickett's most likely the player that falls off this roster sooner rather than later. They'll certainly try to throw some trades out there and see what they can get out of him. But this is about the draft. All right. This is about Dylan Gabriel at the 94 pick. And this is about Shedeur Sanders at the 144 pick. Okay. Players that come at a combined cap cost of $2 million for Cleveland in 2025 because of the waiting game. Now, Gabriel's like an X Factor player if you saw him play at Oregon. Okay. And there's probably a world where he's a little bit more than a quarterback if he can hang in terms of physicality. But this is an organization that has been as aggressively active at this position as you can possibly be, with the biggest albatross contract in the history of the league coinciding with it. Okay. Jameis Winston is going to account for $2.2 million on the books this year in terms of dead cap, because there was a voiding situation with that contract. DTR, who's elsewhere right now, has a small dead cap hit, and we'll see what happens with the Pickett situation, but I do expect movement on that. So Watson's going to hit some kind of IR here immediately. All right. Then we talked about last week, there will be an insurance cap relief if he can't play the full season, or if he can't play half the season. The more he sits in terms of that IL list, the bigger the relief can be, which will help in 2026, A, to move on from him, and B, to fit in more of the pieces of this puzzle. But Cleveland was uberly aggressive. All right. And they eventually at one point in time had 8 or 9 picks. They traded themselves into a situation where it ended up being 2, 4, 6, 7 full picks, but 2 significant defensive players to start, a running back that probably will start in Quinshon Judkins immediately out of the gate, and 2 quarterbacks at the back end of this thing to do as much damage as they can possibly do and compete for this position, not just today, not just in August, but in 2026, where they have the practice squad for these players available. And like I said, most likely giving the keys to Joe Flacco, at least out of the gate, to keep this team competitive. There's a lot of pieces here, as we've noted, that could have been removed over the course of the past 2 months in terms of trades and releases, and they just weren't. They doubled down on a lot of it. They put their foot down. They publicly came out and said, we're not going backwards, we're not staying still, we're going forwards, before they handed Myles Garrett $100 million fully guaranteed. And now they've sort of backed that up by trading out of number 2, not taking the gadget player in Travis Hunter, and voting more for a balanced, targeted, pinpoint specific draft. And I think a lot of the outlets right now, in terms of the grading and the analysis of it, have Cleveland pretty damn high, and I have to as well. Okay. Should they have taken Shedeur Sanders earlier? It doesn't matter, because they didn't need to. So you can have the discussions about what happened there, but they still got their guy and a Dillon Gabriel, a very different, right, a more athletic quarterback, to come in and compete for this job immediately. And they can slow play it, they can quick play it, they can do everything they need to do because of the moves that they've made, which have been somewhat calculated. They didn't rush into a Kirk Cousins trade. They didn't overpay for Aaron Rodgers when the rest of the league was telling us out loud, hey, nobody's doing that anymore. Okay. And Russell Wilson's contract with the Giants sort of alluded to the fact that logic was setting in with this situation. So I give him a hell of a lot of credit, because this could be a team that is sitting on Deshaun Watson's contract, pouting about it, and using that as a way to deplete financially the rest of this roster. And it's exactly the opposite. Are they going to win a bunch of ball games? I don't think so, because a lot of these moves are going to take some time to percolate and to gel. And the division's a monster, by the way. But depending on what happens in Pittsburgh, that's a team that could jump over. Okay. Because we just kind of broke down how there are a lot more questions than answers in Pittsburgh right now at the quarterback position. And can Kirk Cousins change that quickly? Yes. But we'll see if Aaron Rodgers or Kirk Cousins walks in that door anytime soon here. Okay. I'm not going to sit here and tell you how much money Shedeur Sanders lost. You can easily see that on our draft tracker. All right. Our draft tracker, NFL.com, spottrack.com/NFL/draft, easy enough, has all 257 picks, all the information you need, and all of the contracts associated with those picks. So you can quickly look at what pick 5 or pick 9 would have been, and go all the way down to where he was drafted and do the quick math. It is what it is. There's no other way to say it, because every team said no 4 times. And then Cleveland said, finally, enough is enough. Let's trade up and get this guy and make this a very nice situation for us. all things considered. But the quarterback stuff was interesting because it wasn't just Shedeur who dropped. All right. Most of the conversation, I think, will be had about how big time, high flying college quarterbacks, even last season, had to wait quite a bit to hear their name called. And I'm talking the last one picked, Quinn Ewers with Texas, 231 to the Dolphins, a situation that could be fluid, but isn't right now. And we'll certainly see how that bores out. But that was one of those picks that just kept him off the UDFA market. Okay, that's Miami saying, great, if he's there, we'll do it, because it's certainly a need for us at some point, if not immediately. But that's not a we love this guy, we want him pick. That's a keep him out of the UDFA chaos pick. And that's a guy who showed some real success at the college level at Texas, a college that I think put out 12 draft picks over the course of the weekend here. I mentioned Will Howard of Pittsburgh at pick 185, a guy, a championship winning college quarterback. Riley Leonard at Notre Dame, a playoff quarterback in college football, goes to the Colts to compete with Daniel Jones and Anthony Richardson. He's got a real shot there. So that's the thing, right? Is we've got these players who have college accord, who are coming into the NFL late, but they're in situations, Howard, Leonard, to some degree Ewers, but depending on Tua's injury situation, even Jalen Milroe, and certainly Shedeur. We've got late third through late seventh round players here drafted at the quarterback position that will at least have an opportunity to be given a look over the course of the next few months for 2025 starting statuses. It's just a fact. Okay. It's just a fact. Now, Jalen Milroe, it happened in Seattle before. Milroe could come in and blow that organization away, and they would sit Sam Darnold in his $37.5 million guaranteed immediately. They would. Okay. Because this position is just go win ball games. It is. And when you're not over, maxing out your salary, and that's not what Darnold is. Okay. Darnold's a mid-range salary at a quarterback position. That's a beatable contract. Milroe can go and win that job and take away Sam Darnold's starting position right now based on how that contract looks. So 5 late round quarterback picks will have a chance to at least get a look in minicamp and at training camp. And that's not common. It's not, certainly Cam Ward's going to play. I would bet that Jackson Dart doesn't play, but he knows it. Russell Wilson's going to get the chance for 4 weeks. And then if it's Russell Wilson from last year, who knows? Okay. Would Jameis be next, or would Jackson Dart be next? That's what Dart is staring down over the course of the next few months. Is I've got to at least get myself in a situation where if Wilson falters, I'm the guy they turn to, not Jameis Winston. So fascinating stuff. And by the way, Tyler Shaw, the Louisville quarterback who kind of became the Bo Nix light version of the 2025 quarterback situation, should be the starting quarterback in New Orleans, despite Derek Carr's outlook. I think it's time for new blood there. The only reason Derek Carr is there, as we talked about many, many times, is contractual. I don't think it's from a quarterback production standpoint, but it has been a need standpoint as well. Well, now there's not a need. If this kid can show that he can play over the course of the next few months, I believe he'll be the starting quarterback week 1. And it'll just be a waiting game to move on from Derek Carr at that point in time. So we'll be following these closely, but the quarterback stuff that was not high profile coming into the draft certainly gave us plenty of storylines to take away and keep an eye on over the course of the next few months and certainly into the start of the 2025 season. So that's the initial takeaway from this draft. It was a good draft, 35 trades, plenty of work for us to do on our end. If you see any mistypes or errors on our end, please reach out. But hopefully we've got everything tightened up. And in terms of the UDFAs and the trades and the extensions to follow in the coming weeks, patience, because we're going to show a little bit of patience ourselves and make sure that we have absolute structure and guarantee numbers correct before we go and put these out there into the world to be reported. For Scott Allen, my name is Mike Ginnitti. Thanks for listening to this edition of the Spot Track Podcast.